Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 3 through 9. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, you are not going to wash my feet." Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part of me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." We have two gospel readings today. The second being from Mark, Gospel according to Mark chapter 10, verses 42 to 45. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Thanks be to God. Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart, be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Amen. I am sitting on a bench at the edge of a pool. The sun shines brightly in a blue sky in early spring. A gentle breeze rustles dead grass, spreading the scent of dry hay. Birds chirp and sing. The water ripples as the sun reflects off the pond into my eyes. Near the shore, the reflection of the sun shines into my face. I realize if I wait long enough, the reflection of the sun will move across the water, up the bank, and wash my feet in sunlight. I decide to wait. On the pond, geese float and honk. One goose appears to have something perched on its back. Eventually, this goose makes its way to shore and walks about on the grass in the warmth of the sun. I realize what is on its back is its own wing. The wing must have been badly broken to jut into the air at such an angle. The goose is streamlined, designed for flight, but its wing is broken. All this happened on a silent retreat at a convent in Indiana. At the beginning of the retreat, we seminarians gathered around to share our hopes, fears, and prayers about the upcoming 24 hours of silence. My prayer is that I would gain insight into my being called as a minister. I believe the images I received while I sat at the edge of the pond were the answer to my prayer. Let's look closer at today's readings. Peter, in the foot washing scene in the book of John, did not want Jesus to wash his feet because it was a turning over of societal norms. It seemed dishonorable for Jesus to wash the disciples' feet. It was foolishness. Washing a guest's feet was a sign of hospitality in biblical times, but the guests washed their own feet, or the host had a servant wash their feet. The master of the house would not have done the washing. Since Jesus was their master or teacher, the disciples considered it scandalous for him to be washing their feet. This can be seen in Peter's resistance to letting Jesus wash his feet. Jesus was overturning societal norms. Jesus explains it himself a few verses later. Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done. Jesus was setting an example of service and hospitality. Likewise, in the Mark reading, James and John cannot get into their heads what Jesus is trying to do. You would think James and John would have gotten the idea by now. They had been virtually living with Jesus for years, walking with him daily, watching him heal people, hearing him teach about picking up a cross, watching him argue with a religious establishment, breaking bread with him in some very strange and lowly circles. They had already argued about who was the greatest back in chapter 9, verse 34. On that occasion, Jesus had told them, whoever wants to be the first must be last of all and servant of all. But now in chapter 10, verse 35, James and John have the nerve to come right out and ask Jesus if they can have places of honor when he comes into his glory. Jesus tells them it is not that easy, and hints that it might involve some nasty business, and that it's not up to Jesus anyway. The rest of the disciples discover that James and John have been asking favors of Jesus, and they get angry. And are they angry because they understand what Jesus is about, but James and John do not? Not likely. Back in chapter 9, when Jesus talked to them about it the first time, all the disciples argued with one another about who was the greatest. No, they were angry because they were afraid James and John might get places of honor, and they wouldn't. They didn't get it, and neither do we. Our concept of leadership is formed by society. The type of leader held up by society is an aggressive, strong, self-confident, charismatic person. So I assumed I could not be a leader. No matter how many times we read that a Christian leader is actually a servant, no matter how many times we read whoever wants to be the first must be last of all and servant of all, no matter how many times we read whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all, like Peter, we respond, you will never wash my feet. Perhaps Jesus' own explanation will shed light on the subject. How does Jesus respond to Peter when Peter refuses to have his feet washed? He says, unless I wash you, you have no share with me. The word share is not common English usage, but can be better understood as having a place with someone. To have a place with someone is to be in relationship with that person. So what Jesus is really saying to Peter is, unless I wash you, you have no relationship with me. Peter understands that, and he is a student, and Jesus is a teacher. The relationship is understandable in terms of societal norms. But Jesus is saying that at a top-down relationship, in a top-down relationship, there is no relationship at all. Peter would expect to wash Jesus' feet, but Jesus is saying, if you don't let the teacher wash the student's feet, there is no mutuality in that relationship. Jesus refuses to claim authority from a hierarchical position, a position which would be normal in their society and ours. Jesus is saying, from now on we serve one another. You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and the great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. In the world Jesus is bringing in, it's not about leaders and followers. It's about mutuality in relationship through service. It doesn't appear that the kind of leadership Jesus has in mind has anything to do with the kind of leadership we in our culture are familiar with. Jesus understood that to be human is to be a goose with a broken wing. We are designed to fly, but we each have a broken wing. So we spend most of our time walking and swimming instead. Jesus also knew that in order for us to fly, we need to help one another. Relationships that are based on unequal status or leadership that is based on societal norms actually keep us from flying. Let's go back and sit by the pool in the warm sun where we started our journey. The sun shines brightly in a blue sky in early spring. A gentle breeze rustles the dead grass, spreading the smell of dry hay. Birds chirp and sing. The water ripples as the sun reflects off the pond into my eyes. After a couple of hours, the sun moved up the bank onto the grass and washed my feet in the sunlight. I reflected on the awesome nature of service. The sun, distant, fiery, aloof, bent down to wash my feet. This was the answer to my prayer at the beginning of the retreat regarding my call and leadership. I am a goose with a broken wing, walking in the warmth of the sun, seeking not to be served, but to serve. Even a goose with a broken wing can swim and walk. Of course, in seeking to serve one another, all are served. Amen.